Eddie Muller here, welcoming you once again to Noir Alley. If you're tuning in to get your weekly ration of big city crimes and good-looking but dirty lying dames, you might want to switch over to some cable news network. Our story today is set in the orange groves of Southern California, and the only dame involved is the future First Lady of the United States, Nancy Reagan, and she is as far from noir as you can get. Just say no? Trust me, that is not the password to get into the Noir Alley Speakeasy. Our film today, from 1952, is Talk About a Stranger. It's part of a subset of the genre I call kid noir, which frankly is a subset so small it barely exists. There's RKO's classic The Window, Shadow on the Wall from MGM, and the great noir fairy tale The Night of the Hunter, released by United Artists in 1955. What they all have in common is that children are central to the plot. What sets today's film apart is that Bobby Fontaine, the boy at the heart of the story, well played by Billy Gray, is the antagonist. Kids in movies are typically innocents threatened by the grown-up world. Rarely is the kid guilty of worse behavior than the adults. And if you're yelling at your screen, well, what about the bad seed? Let's just say there's a definite line between noir and horror, and Patty McCormick stomped her nasty little feet all over it. Talk About a Stranger is a story about a boy and his dog, one that takes a dark and disturbing turn. It's also a time capsule of the period, the height of the McCarthy era, and there's no mistaking that the film was meant as an allegory for the anti-communist witch hunt that was dominating the nation's headlines. What's unique about this film is how it distills all the dread, suspicion, and fear of others into a story straight out of Aesop's fables. The screenplay is by Margaret Fitz, adapted from a short story by Charlotte Armstrong called The Enemy. Fitz was a Stanford graduate signed to the MGM Writers Program right out of school. She was also responsible for writing Jacques Tourneur's Stars in My Crown, as well as Moonfleet, directed by Fritz Lang. Here, she was fleshing out a story by a woman who was one of the best mystery writers in the business. Charlotte Armstrong started writing novels in the early 40s, and by the time she died in 1969, she had 29 books to her credit, one of which, A Dram of Poison, won the Edgar Award for Best Novel from the Mystery Writers of America, a prize for which she was nominated 3 times. 2 other Armstrong adaptations have also been shown on Noir Alley. 1947's The Unsuspected, directed by Michael Curtiz, and Mischief, released by Fox in 1952 under the title Don't Bother to Knock. Charlotte Armstrong was a terrific storyteller, and young Margaret Fitz does a nice job with this adaptation, expanding Armstrong's story with her own original touches, although she certainly didn't pad anything. The finished film, a genuine B, runs only 65 minutes. If you want those scant minutes to be memorable, you can't do any better than hiring John Alton as your director of photography. As I've noted over the years, Alton worked freelance, available to any producers and directors who'd pay well to have his visual alchemy enhance their movies. In this case, director David Bradley was the recipient of Alton's genius. They tell the story almost entirely from the point of view of young Bobby Fontaine, and by the climax, they leave no doubt as to whether or not this is a film noir. I'm betting a lot of kids who saw this in 1952 had nightmares caused by the images Alton seared into their brains. When director David Bradley made this, he had already made such classics as Julius Caesar and Peer Gynt in college on 16 millimeter. Like Margaret Fitz, Bradley came to the movie business straight out of university, very uncommon in Hollywood at this time. All the war horses in the business, guys like Raoul Walsh, Frank Borzage, and John Ford, they'd been around since the silent days, when the language of film was still being invented by them. Bradley was of the next generation, the first to study filmmaking in school and see it as a career path. His feature-length adaptation of Peer Gynt was made at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1940, with 17-year-old classmate Charlton Heston playing the lead. MGM hired Bradley in 1950 as a directing intern based on the strength of those amateur features, which received recognition in international film festivals. Bradley acquits himself quite well in his first Hollywood assignment, but then, starting out with John Alton as your DP is kind of like singing a duet with Ella Fitzgerald at open mic night. Even if you can barely carry the tune, you're still going to win. There's also a real-life connection to the witch hunt in this film. MGM contract actress Nancy Davis had her career derailed when she was branded a communist in one of the many red-baiting publications of the time. Let that be a lesson to how out of control blacklisting can get. To fight the charges, she sought dispensation from the president of the Screen Actors Guild, Ronald Reagan. In fact, that is how they met. I'll let you contemplate the irony of that little historical tidbit while we settle in for a story about a boy and his dog, Noir Alley style. Here is Talk About a Stranger. Billy Gray was only 14 when he made Talk About a Stranger, but he was already a showbiz veteran, having appeared in almost 50 movies since his screen debut at the age of 5 in 1943's Man of Courage. It helped that his mother, Beatrice Gray, was a busy actress herself. She made a stampede of westerns in the 1940s, often finding a spot for her real-life son in her home on the range. Talk About a Stranger was certainly not the first film noir Billy Gray appeared in. If you watch closely, you can see him horsing around in The Strange Affair of Uncle Harry, Suspense, The Strange Woman, The Gangster, Abandoned, Between Midnight and Dawn, and The Killer That Stalked New York. He even asks Humphrey Bogart for an autograph in director Nick Ray's masterpiece, In a Lonely Place. Of course, all these were fleeting appearances. The role he's most remembered for was in the film he made just before this one, The Day the Earth Stood Still, in which his character, Bobby Benson, gives a tour of the nation's capital to alien visitor Klaatu, played by Michael Rennie. Older viewers probably remember Billy Gray from his role as Bud Anderson, son of Robert Young and Jane Wyatt, on the popular 50s sitcom Father Knows Best. If you've been watching Noir Alley regularly, then you know that several members of that all-American Anderson family, Mom, Pop, and Little Bud, all had a short, dark double life in film noir. Billy Gray's father in today's film, George Murphy, also had a double life, maybe even a triple life. After dropping out of Yale in the 1920s, Murphy led the knockaround life of so many people who ended up gravitating to Hollywood. He worked on auto assembly lines as a coal miner and sold real estate. But the thing he was best at was dancing, which ended up landing him roles in Hollywood musicals like Broadway Melody of 1938 and 1940, and the big 1942 hit For Me and My Gal with Judy Garland and Gene Kelly. Like his performing doppelganger, Dick Powell, Murphy started doing more dramatic roles in the late 40s, in pictures like The Arnello Affair, Battleground, and the noir thriller Border Incident. But Murphy's most significant Hollywood role was as president of the Screen Actors Guild, a post he filled from 1944 to 46, tumultuous years in the industry, when talent and trade unions were pulled every which way by vying political factions. That was Murphy's first taste of politics, and apparently he liked it. In 1953, he retired from acting and became a prominent player in California's Republican Party. He served as entertainment liaison to the White House in the 1950s, arranging the inauguration celebrations of Dwight Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy in 1961, back when American politicians still had respect for their rivals. Murphy ran for office himself in 1964, winning a vacant Senate seat in California, where he served until 1971. His co-star in today's film, Nancy Davis, married Ronald Reagan the month before Talk About a Stranger was released. Reagan made no bones about the fact that George Murphy was the model for his political career. To say he followed in his colleagues' footsteps is dead on. Reagan succeeded Murphy as president of the Screen Actors Guild, became the governor of California in 1967, and of course, eventually the President of the United States. It's not absurd to suggest that had he not gotten throat cancer in the early 70s, putting an end to his political career, George Murphy might have been the first actor to run for and possibly win the presidency. Now, as for the erstwhile villain of today's film, I remember Kurt Kasner on the old Irwin Allen TV series Land of the Giants. But what a life he led before that. Born in Austria, he was destined for a career in his stepfather's restaurant business until one day he waited on Max Reinhardt, the most eminent theater impresario in Europe. It inspired him to study with Reinhardt, and Kasner came to America with him in 1936. His busy stage career was interrupted by the Second World War, where Kasner served in the U.S. Army's photographic unit. He documented battles in the South Pacific, the Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri, and the aftermath of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Using these experiences, he wrote a critically acclaimed one-act play called First Cousins, which he dedicated to the thousands of foreign-born American soldiers who had fought for their adopted country. Although his accent and features relegated him to supporting roles in film, on stage he created the character of Pozzo in Samuel Beckett's original production of Waiting for Godot, and the character of Max Detweiler in the first stage production of The Sound of Music, the role played by Richard Haydn in the movie. Next week, I'll have a film featuring an actor who's been a fixture on Noir Alley over the years, Edward G. Robinson. He co-stars with a woman making her first appearance in these parts, Paulette Goddard. They're together in the 1953 release Vice Squad. It may not be Scarlet Street or Key Largo, but it's still pretty entertaining. Until then, see you in the shadows.
Next on TCM, The Nanny, then Dead Ringer, and later, Without Love. TCM is stuck in the friend zone tonight.